This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Wednesday morning. It's January 31st, and we have Chris Hine from the Star Tribune with us today, who wrote a very well done and interesting Nickeil Alexander-Walker feature story for Sunday's paper. I always love like the first feature on a new player. I feel like it gets everybody like, oh, this guy has like a
personality.
Exactly. And Nickeil very much does, though, is very sheltered. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
Again, I got Chris here. Congratulations to your San Francisco 49ers.
That's right. Never in doubt. Brock Purdy.
Yeah, right.
Brock Purdy, it's never in doubt. Twice now. Never in doubt.
Never in doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, we got a while here until the actual Super Bowl. We were just talking before. We're going to do like some sort of competition for Super Bowl Sunday with Chris and Jace and Kyle and myself with Prize Picks or something like that. We'll figure that out next week. But that's coming up for you. Also, I don't know if everybody knows this. I certainly know this. You're a big Grammys guy. That's your other Super Bowl. That's
so it's like weird. It's like the Grammys are my Super Bowl, the Emmys are my Oscars, and the Super Bowl itself is like the Emmys. If you can follow that logic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Basically, what about the Tonys? Where's your EGOT?
Tonys are the Tonys for me. That's just that's just it. Actually, no. Emmys are the Super Bowl. Grammys are the Oscars. Super Bowl is the Emmy. Yeah,
that's what threw me off. Yeah. So you're
anyway.
always good at predicting this stuff. Like, I mean, we don't have you
Kyle. Listen, we should have Kyle on and ask him how much money he won 2 years ago when I told him to bet Silk Sonic for Record and Song of the Year when nobody was predicting it. I'm like, you should look into this. And I put it out there on Twitter. It was free. It was free money for anybody that was observing my Twitter account.
Well, what do you got now? Come on. We've lost people a bunch of money on here in other ways.
We are going with Miley Cyrus for Record and Song of the Year. I think you could still get her. I want to say the Gold Derby website had her at like 5-1 odds or something like that. If I was betting this year, I don't bet myself. I don't like it, but I will suggest for other people that do. I have suggested going with Billie Eilish and covering your butt with or Miley Cyrus and Billie Eilish in Record and Song of the Year, putting money on both of them
because you're guaranteeing that one of those.
You're guaranteeing. I'm 99% certain that one of those two is winning Record and Song of the Year. So like money on both of them, and you're good.
I've known Chris for a long time now, and we have a lot of sitting around in media rooms together time, which like for the first like October through December, me and Chris are often doing similar things when we're sitting around in our killing time, which is looking at our fantasy teams. But I can vouch for Chris that he is very, very much studies this stuff. And you have been right. We've done this sitting around many times before. If you are tracking it,
Yep. A couple years ago, I recommended putting money on Billie Eilish in Record and Song of the Year when nobody was predicting her, and she won one of them. So you would have won money because she did win Record of the Year. And this is the Grammys.
What's the logic though? Like, what you like? I feel like normally you're like it's going to be this because of this.
The Grammys are just very predictable. There's a little bit science and there's a little bit intangible, just kind of quality to it. I've always watched the Grammys. In the major awards, they always go for a certain style of artist. They tend to be white, which is a huge criticism of the Grammys over the years. I mean, it is really bad. Like their track record of awarding Black artists in the R&B, hip hop field, or the general field is atrocious. But if you can use that knowledge to try and win money, there's like people that have kind of live instrumentation in their music that don't use samples. That's very frowned upon by the Academy voters.
That makes sense, I think.
And like artists that are viewed more as like authentic kind of singery, songwritery types.
Sure.
Billie Eilish being one of them. Bruno Mars being another one of them, Taylor Swift being one of them. So that's in the general field. In the genre categories, it's all over the map. But in the general field, that tends Harry Styles winning album of the year last year. You can kind of see a through line in a lot of the things that win these awards.
Also white.
I mean, it's a shameful thing of the Grammys that like in years where there have been like these great rap albums or these great R&B albums, like U2 is winning like their third record of the year in 5 years or something like that back in the 2000s. I'm not that I'm bitter about U2 beating Mariah Carey for Song of the Year and Green Day beating her for Record of the Year and U2 beating her for Album of the Year in 2006. I'm not bitter at all about that. I don't remember. I don't even remember what the songs and albums were, quite frankly. Not at all. But yeah, you go through Grammys history and it's bad. It's just bad. So yeah.
Okay, well we have Chris's predictions, and that's this. That's Super Bowl 1 this Sunday, that's Super Bowl 2 for the Niners.
Coming up next.
February 11th, actually. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Following night is having a Super Bowl party. Let's talk about this Nickeil Alexander-Walker story. And we've talked about Nickeil, but particularly us two, just kind of been like intrigued by him from day one, kind of first as a person, and then second as a basketball player. Because if we do wind back to the trade deadline of last season, Nickeil was one pretty clearly like a throw-in salary match, but like a flyer piece, right, in the trade, which led to not having, he didn't come in with a specific role. It was kind of like in and out after the trade deadline. And there's like the All-Star break, and then he slowly ramped up his role. Obviously, we know what happened in the play-in and the playoffs. He was a huge actual basketball piece. But I was just interested in sort of his story back then, because if we remember back to his draft class, like he was that dude in the draft class that all the draft people like loved. It's the body type, it's the wingspan, he fits the mold of the evolution of the guard position, and a lot of really smart basketball people were on that, and it didn't work out in New Orleans. And what is often the case, and what we often don't figure out for years down the line, is it's often not about the basketball stuff that kind of defines that temporary sort of derailment at the beginning of the career that Nickeil experienced, individually. He talked in your story basically about how he was kind of hard to be coached back then. Some of that was on him. There was also a lot of different coaches in his time in New Orleans there. And it was just, then it led to, some chaos and being traded and moved around from Utah, or a brief stint in Portland there. He was bouncing around, and the bouncing around continued. And again, 12 months ago when he came to Minnesota, and kind of the lead of your story was about how that idea of the move to Minnesota was terrifying to him. And that's an interesting juxtaposition, given how 12 months later, he's but very much found a path to be moving on that is believable, that makes him, kind of seem like a player who's going to have a 10, 12 year career, maybe more in this league now. Then a credit to him. But I think what's behind making those jumps and those leaps and that growth is interesting. And you did a good job of digging into it. Maybe we can just start with the terrified part. What was that like, talking to him, and why was it terrifying to him to come to Minnesota?
Yeah, so there was a lot going on kind of in his mind at that time. He's not getting minutes on a rebuilding team. He's in the last year of his deal. This is the time when, you might be out of the league because you're trying to get a new contract, and other people are coming into the league to, replace you. Getting traded to a playoff team, or a team with playoff aspirations. Can you crack their rotation? Do they need you? or were you just filler in this trade? And you're playing for a coach who you think might have a different idea of who you are as a player now based on your rookie season. So it's a whole lot going on, right? And you've got what, 2 months to try and prove yourself, right?
Before you're a free agent.
Before you're a free agent, essentially. So that's a lot to handle for somebody in their career. And you're moving to a new place. You know, you don't know anybody, all new teammates, the whole thing, right? And so there's a lot going on in his head at that point in time. But I think one of the things that struck me upon meeting him for the first time, I remember it was in Memphis, that it was his and Mike's first game with the team after the trade. And I remember seeing him at his locker, and he just pulled out a book and started reading. And I was like, well, that's interesting. You just don't see that every day. Most guys are listening to music, or they're scrolling through their phones, or they're, not often do you see. There's some guys on the team that'll also be kind of pulling up a book. Rudy
has books.
Rudy has books at his locker as well. But Nickeil said he really started to do it, early last season when he wasn't getting time in Utah, and this was just a way for him to kind of get his mind right, and prepare for his opportunity should it come around again. Never came around again in Utah, really, but it came around in Minnesota, and so he was kind of ready for it, and in a better kind of space, and just had a different mindset from his rookie season, when he said he was very hard-headed.
Right. It's so I had seen him, right, having the book, and you and I had talked about books and had him, we've talked about that before.
Yeah. I
didn't know until reading your story how much it's almost like a consumption of him is reading. It almost feels like a place, or seems like a place he feels he needs to go to, to kind of compartmentalize his life a little bit. That was the read I was getting of like, I'm working, and when I'm not working, I'm doing this. And obviously, he has a family and those sort of things too. And I understand that's a third compartment that, you didn't dive into that much and understood, like that's there too. But it was just interesting to see him, or be able to envision him sort of, okay, I'm working, and then turning the page, I'm in my book, and I'm calming down doing that. And he's doing it on the training table. He's doing it at his locker. He's doing it on the bus. He's doing it on the plane. I don't know. Did they take a train to
They're on planes.
Washington?
Yeah, no, they're
you
flying.
took a train.
I took a train. They flew.
We recorded this early. I messed up like 6 words already.
But basically, like, the book became like where guys, again, you might be at their locker scrolling through social media or whatever. He does not want to be on social media that much. I mean, he does have, he's on Instagram, and I don't know if it's him posting stuff, but he is active on Instagram and things like that. But I think the mindless scrolling that we all tend to do is something that he really wanted to eliminate from his daily routine. So in those instances where you and I might otherwise be tempted to pull out our phones and start scrolling through Twitter or Instagram, he's pulling out his book and he's reading a couple pages or a couple paragraphs in the 5-10 minutes where he's killing time in the locker room or on the training table or whatever. Like, that's what his habit has become. It's like, don't pull out your phone and go on social media, pull out your book and read. That's kind of what it's become.
Yeah. It was funny. Like, initially the way you were framing it in the story, I was like, man, this kind of sounds exhausting. Like, he's doing nothing but working and reading. And then you said the
that's not to say that's like he's like not going home and like watching a movie or something.
I'm saying I misconstrued it. I misconstrued it.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, it almost sounds like an obsession. But then you realize it's a replacement for all the other BS. Like scrolling on, on Instagram, or it's whatever. Like you said, how much time do all of us waste just like in the nothingness of the so marginally valuable time we spend on our phones just looking at dumb stuff, rather than, I mean, it just seems like an efficiency play to him. He's like, okay, I know what that gives me. I know what I was doing with my dead time. And I know that I've read a book or I've read a few books and I found that time to be more productive. And he just said, I'm going to just try and sprinkle that in and fill in all the cracks in my day-to-day of work, which they have weird jobs, right? So much of the time is on tables, is on planes, not trains, and all that, where you just have a lot of like killing time to do. And I thought that was interesting. And I think it's so, it's like so representative of what I understand like his ethos to be as just like a player, just from observing him. I remember when we were in Boston a couple weeks ago at that game, I was sitting out there before watching like everybody warm up. Not everybody warm up. At the time, it was Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Troy Brown Jr. were on the floor warming up. And I remember being like, and Mike Conley wasn't playing in that game. And I was gonna like take a video or like tweet something out of being like, Nickeil Alexander-Walker looks like super ready, super dialed and focused. Like, look for him to deliver, whatever. Yeah. But then I was like, and that was the weird back-to-back from Orlando to Boston. They flew in that day. I was genuinely impressed by how locked in Nickeil Alexander-Walker looked in that time. But I didn't send it out because I was like, I see Nickeil do this every day. Every game I'm at, every bit of exposure I have to the like unseen time of Nickeil Alexander-Walker, it always looks like that. And that has so much stood out to me in the brief time that I've covered him. And just like the person in me, or the person in me that's cheering for these other just people as people. It's so cool for me to know that this is the type of person and focus he's had as a 24, 25-year-old, and that it's paying off. He is an extremely consistent basketball player, has been this season. And it's hard to not connect some dots to mean like he is as night to night consistent as he is almost because of the way he's adapted this lifestyle and focus off the floor too. I just think it's super cool.
It's a great story. You don't see this every day, right?
Right.
You don't see somebody come in as kind of the almost the afterthought of a trade like that and really carve out a future and a role with that team. I mean, how often in the NBA does that actually happen? Very rarely. And I think seeing him play backup point guard essentially in Mike's absence at times this month, and get that start, to me, it's actually changed how I kind of view the needs of this team moving forward. I think with him, I think they can survive if Mike Conley were to be out for an extended period of time. I think he could do okay filling in, and you could put your eggs in one and put your eggs in one of the other baskets that you might need at the trade deadline here. And I think I've advocated for shooting previously here. I would rather have a shooter / scorer than I would, I think, a backup point guard right now for the rest of the season. And that's in part because I think Nickeil has shown that he can do a decent enough job in that role to get them through.
Yes. No, absolutely. Like that's part of I was saying that I think yesterday with Chase, where it's like, I just can't get him. I'm not saying backup point guard isn't a quote unquote need on this team. I can't put it as the number one need for this team. And given the limited assets, it's hard to make the case for it. I want to keep talking about Nickeil a little bit more in the context of your story and just kind of how good he's been this year. Let's grab our first break here. Today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company. They have obviously the Wolves Mavs game this evening, Wolves Magic on Friday, Wolves Rockets on Sunday. That is obviously a place for you all who are listening to go to those games. If you are not, I'm going to be attending them in person. They've been getting good crowds to come out and watch those games. So as always, if there's a Wolves game, Falling Knife is going to be showing it with the sound on. But we also want to let you know that they are having that Super Bowl party. It's $50 all you can eat from Rectangle Pizza, which it has rectangle pizza, it has nachos, all kind of those Super Bowl type of foods. That's $50 all you can eat. Plus you get a pitcher of beer or 2 craft beers, I guess, 2 pints that you can have there too. So if you're looking, I mean, it's, what are we, 11 days away from the Super Bowl and you're making Super Bowl plans, consider Falling Knife for that. And if you want to sign up and get tickets in advance, go to @FallingKnifeBC on Instagram, and the link is in their bio there, and you can get yourself some tickets for that. So that's Falling Knife Brewing Company for Wolves games, but also consider it for the Super Bowl, for Super Bowl Sunday.
That Super Bowl deal sounds really nice. Kind of wish I was in town for it.
Where are you going to be?
I'll be in Los Angeles. The Wolves play the Clippers the next day.
There you go. Okay.
So I got to make some plans for Los Angeles and figure out where the hell I'm going to watch it out there.
Yeah, you're not going to just be like the weirdo who just is in his room, like in the dark, like sweating. And
well, listen, that is an option. It's on the table. I'm not gonna say it's not. The idea of just me being alone with my thoughts in a room watching the Super Bowl is actually kind of appealing in some ways. I'm not gonna lie. So we'll see how that goes.
No matter what happens, I will be in Portland the day after that, and me and I, and as will Kyle, be at those games. So we will celebrate or console you based on what happens in that game. Also, just quickly here, today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks, prizepicks.com. You can go to or download the Prize Picks app. It is daily fantasy. So different options to put down some bets on projections there. $100 sign-up bonus if you use the promo code Dane. What I have up on the screen now is, as we are kind of moving away from football, obviously we've kind of focused on that a lot with Prize Picks, but there are these NBA, they have NBA projections every night too. Right now up on the screen, like I have all the Wolves props for tonight's game against Dallas. You can just see Ant here. Ant's numbers, his projections are set at 27.5 points, 5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, 2.5 made threes. You can kind of, put that together, which ones you like, or, you like him to go have more than that or less than that, and maybe put that together with a couple other, maybe a Dallas player that you think is going to play a lot because apparently all their good players are out or resting in this game. But yeah, Ant, Jaden, Kat, Rudy, they all have a bunch of different props up there for tonight. So if you listen to this Wednesday afternoon, go check that out at prizepicks.com or the Prize Picks app. And if you want to create an account, use promo code Dane for a $100 sign up bonus. All right, Chris, let's keep talking about Nickeil a little bit. I want to maybe any other anecdotes from that story too, but I also want to more broadly talk about Nickeil in the context of just the Wolves bench, which has been an interesting sort of adventure this season. I guess maybe fusing those two things together. What else from your story has led you to understand why Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been as effective as a basketball player as he has been this year?
He's trying to declutter his mind on the court, which is kind of an interesting juxtaposition, that he's reading all this stuff and like putting a lot of information in his mind.
Yeah.
In the hope that he can free his mind when he plays. Because Finch, when I talked to Finch for the story, and even Nickeil himself, it's like, there's a tendency there to overthink things and to always be wanting to kind of analyze a moment or a situation or what have you. But one of the goals of this is he's learned to just kind of be freer, just play, trust your instincts, trust your work, trust your preparation. And I think that's certainly helped him, especially when it comes to shooting. Like, just don't try not to think about it too much. Just you put up, you put in the work, you put up so many shots, and just trust it when the moment comes. And I think that's helped him a lot. And Finch, I think on the other, he sees that, and one of the things that obviously Nickeil thought Finch was going to be like, think of him as a certain way, but Finch was very open-minded. I think it's worth noting, when Nickeil got here in the trade and was just like, I remember him from New Orleans, obviously. I want to see what's here. And it wasn't like he was, like, oh, this guy, I remember him. I'm just going to shove him at the end of the bench and we're never going to use him. It was like, oh, but I remember there being a lot of potential there in Nickeil. And so let's see what's there. And so Finch got him into that role, which, he's just taken and run with.
Well, that was interesting. The Finch quotes are really interesting to me, in that they painted some of what the confusion was with Nickeil and of why he didn't have that early career success in New Orleans.
Right.
Which there was, what the quote was, Finch, he was getting a lot of mixed signals as to like what they wanted him to be. And what Finch said in the story was, this is kind of what he always envisioned Nickeil being, at least at first, which was somebody who was going to make his bones on defense and be able to make open spot shots, which I mean, that's exactly who Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been this season. And I think, and thinking back to then, what I think that means is initially there was kind of this vision of him being maybe a lot more than that. I mean, what Finch is describing is starting as a role player and stacking skills on top of that. Much of the same way he talked about Jaden McDaniels when he got here, and Jaden's rookie year, second year, that those times early on in his career. It's like, start out as a role player, stack skills on top of that. I think in New Orleans, the almost like role player would have been underwhelming to them. So they aimed at something different and higher, and there was more of the creation and playmaking and decision making, and the turnovers were high, and getting to the basket and finishing was often ineffective. You would see flashes. I mean, he had like a 40 some point game, I think, or maybe it was like 39. I remember looking up one time earlier this year in that rookie season, when the Pelicans played the Clippers, and it was like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard and those sort of things. So there was these flashes from Nickeil Alexander-Walker in his college tape, and even early on when he was getting an opportunity, that he could maybe be something more, but it was so erratic and so not bankable that I really like the approach. And I've said this, Finch aside, of I actually do think there's something when I watch Nickeil Alexander-Walker that hints at him being able to be more as a playmaker down the line, but starting where they've started with him and establishing the role and slowly adding marginal things to his game that we are seeing more and more, particularly when he starts in place of Mike Conley. It just feels like the right thing for the player, the right thing for the team, and the most likely way to kind of squeeze every drop out of what is only a player making $4.5 million, and $4.5 million next year. Like, he's on a cheap contract. I like Finch's vision there, mostly, I guess, just because personally I share it, but it helps for me to clarify why this was more of a meandering road for Nickeil in his time.
Yeah, you come in as a first round pick, and there's just the burden of expectations, right? And you have to. The front office wants to look like they made the right pick. You don't want to. When you where was he picked in the draft? I escaped me at the moment. Mid first round,
like
right?
17th sound right.
Right,
I looked that up before, but
it's not exactly. It's not a lottery pick, but it's also not like a throwaway pick, right? Like you want to return an investment on the 17th pick, and you hope that it's more than a bench rotation guy. But sometimes that's what it ends up being.
Yeah,
and that's
17th pick.
Yeah, and that's not the worst. And that's not the worst thing in the world. It's. But to a franchise, when you have a first round pick, it's like, oh, this is our guy. How many you parade them in the offseason, like, this is our first round pick this year. We have such high hopes for them. We think they could do this.
We got him at a great value.
We got him at a great. We would have taken him at 8 if he was there.
It's like Leonard Miller.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
And I think it's actually a great comparison. Like, all of the Wolves front office was on the record, pumped about getting Leonard Miller when they got him. They traded up to go get him. And, they were basically saying, like, we thought he was like a 17th overall pick. They like thought he was a fringe lottery guy and got him. But just because you love the value of where someone was picked, which I think New Orleans loved it, doesn't mean they can immediately deliver on that. They might be, more of a quote unquote project, and it's something to develop down the line. And maybe that's to the Leonard Miller point. Like they're not playing him at all this year. And obviously part of that's being on a good team, but a lot of it is like we don't necessarily want him to learn trial by fire, right?
Right.
And instead develop the just like the basic skills to start at, rather than kind of being thrown into being something more than you are at 19. And I think that's just ultimately what happened to Nickeil. He was thrown into being something more than at that age, at that time he was ready to be, and thus had to make all these sort of big life changes and mentality changes so as to get back on the track that he is on right now. Chris, I was looking up just defensive estimated plus minus, which I think is just the best like catch-all sort of stat of a ranking. I really appreciate it with defense.
Or as we call it in the nerd community, DEPM.
DEPM. There you go.
Yes.
And Nickeil is 98th percentile in defensive estimated plus minus, and has been for most of the season.
Yes, spreadsheets.
Yes.
All right.
Actually, the highest, so the most impactful defensive player on the team, according to that metric, which obviously I think we all know it's Rudy Gobert. Rudy's like slightly there behind him, but I don't think that means that this stat is necessarily over exaggerating who Nickeil Alexander-Walker is. And I think about it a lot of like, normally I always look at this when I'm thinking about like all defensive team at the end of the year. And is there like a random guy who kind of maybe I haven't seen a lot of, or they come off of someone's bench, but they might end up squeezing on to that all defensive second team? I'm not saying that's Nickeil for sure, but it reminds me a lot of Alex Caruso. And that's kind of like once he got to Chicago and what that was, he started a little bit, and sometimes he like weirdly plays point guard. But that's not like totally what his skill set is. You're just like, we want to have him on the floor. We like what he creates for us. And even though he's not a perfect point guard, we're going to still play him at point guard sometimes. And I think, man, Alex Caruso is probably going to get traded for some pretty good value at the trade deadline, because he's on like an $8-9 million contract. And I think that's where I think we're seeing Nickeil. What we're seeing Nickeil start to become. We see it night to night on the eye test, right? Of just watching him work his butt off defensively and be smart. But the impact too in the numbers is very much there. And for the Wolves to kind of out of nowhere pluck themselves a Alex Caruso, who maybe has some upside to be a little bit more offensively, I mean, it's a huge win.
It's that whole trade has been a huge win for this team. And like you said, I think you tweeted out the other day, it's like Nickeil's next deal is what, $15 million a year, maybe?
Yeah, I might have exaggerated that a little bit.
But definitely probably more than double what he's making now.
Exactly.
Like if you continue on this trajectory.
I was thinking of it in the like sense that he'll probably get like the mid-level exception. And I said 15. And some people are like, well, that's more than mid-level exception. So a team would find him with cap space.
He probably would be a mid-level guy.
So, but like 13, I don't think it's crazy that some team, 2 years from now, that doesn't have any cap space but has their mid-level exception would be like, we need a defensive piece to our group that can hit some spot shots. We've seen a lot of guys like that, the PJ Tuckers, whatever, over the years, or even Alex Caruso got the majority of the mid-level exception back then. I think that's the next step, for Nickeil, so long as he's able to sustain this. And I really am at the point of like, I wouldn't be surprised if Nickeil has a bad month shooting threes. here or there over the
Sure.
next couple of years.
It happens.
I don't think he's a pure like bankable 3-point shooter, but he shoot 37% this year on volume. We've seen him, that number kind of go up and up. I don't think it is crazy to say that Nickeil Alexander-Walker is going to be making, as the cap kind of goes up, $10 to $13 million a year on his next contract. And most people are like, oh no, like that means we're going to have to let him go. I mean it from the sense of, you got a dude who I think is worth $10 million right now, who's playing for 4.5 on a team that is in major cap trouble. I think that's a big win.
If you're, especially for next year, if you're trying to keep this together in some way, shape, or form, we don't know what next year is going to look like. But you could use somebody who's making $4.5 million as like a spot starter 6-man kind of role. Like that's incredible value. No matter what your cap situation looks like next season.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So yesterday, Shams and Woj and all the newsbreaker guys reported that a memo was sent out to the league that the previous salary cap estimation for next season was going to be $142 million, and it's actually going to be 141, or that's the most recent projection that the league sent to teams. I think that's noteworthy. One, in that 142 was sounding like a low estimation. We've been seeing the cap kind of go up by the maximum 10%, and we've seen that the past couple of years, and kind of expecting, okay, maybe it's projected at 142 now, but if it goes up by the 10%, maybe it's going to be 147, 148. And for teams with cap space or the Wolves, navigating the tax and all those sort of things, you're like, oh man, I hope that number comes in higher. It's going to give the Wolves a little bit more flexibility. It came in 1 million lower, which I think some people are taking as, oh no, it's even more of a crunch now for the Wolves. It's not more of a crunch. It's just not more of a cushion. If that makes sense. The 1 million difference leaves you in the same place as you were before, in that it's just going to be impossible to re-sign Mike Conley without going into the second apron there, which comes with other penalties, along with just like, I think we're so focused on all the penalties of the second apron, like no mid-level, no taking more money back in trades. Maybe your draft pick gets frozen if you're in it for multiple years. The biggest thing with the second apron is it costs so much money to pay the tax.
Right.
Like what some people don't understand is they think exceeding the second apron is when you start paying the tax. No. The Wolves are already certainly paying the tax. The luxury tax line is way in their rearview mirror. They're already for sure over the first apron, which comes with some restrictions. What we're talking about now is the second apron, that if they bring back Mike Conley, they're almost certain to exceed. And that was the case before. So nothing changed. It's going to be tough. Yeah. It's going to be impossible to bring Mike Conley back without making other cap, cost cutting moves and staying underneath the second apron. We knew that. But the other factor to this that totally negates the $1 million difference is Carl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards' next contract was directly tied to a percentage of the salary cap, right? So we knew Ant was going to get 25% of the salary cap. We knew Carl was going to get 35% of the salary cap, or Ant was going to get 30% of the salary cap if he makes All NBA. And what this just does is it ties those percentages to a slightly lower number. And so for Carl, it takes his deal down $350,000 for next year, and Ant, if he makes All NBA, $300,000 for next year. So that's $650K off of the 1 million he lost. We're in the same spot. It doesn't make a difference. You're in the same bad spot you were before. $300K different. That's not the difference. What we do know now is Carl Anthony Towns' next contract will be for 4 years, $221.1 million. That's the number now that we know. And Ant, his contract will be 5 years, $204.45 million if he doesn't make All NBA. And if he does make All NBA, it'll be 5 years, $245.34. So we know the number is about $41 million now that Ant has on the line tied to making All NBA. I think that's really the most newsworthy thing here. Everything else about the Wolves cap situation already kind of was what it was. That's just where we're at. Carl and Ant each having, in the life of their contracts, $1 or $2 million shaved off the 200 some $million total. So nominal difference, but I just figured we should probably mention that.
Yeah, when I saw that, I basically shrugged when I saw it. I'm like, that doesn't really change anything for them next season. If it had gone up significantly, I would have been like, well, that's interesting, or down significantly. But yeah, that makes almost zero difference. I think it's been interesting now that we've hit the more than halfway point of the season, that what we could all kind of see coming last summer related to like this 65 game threshold for awards, all NBA, which is tied to contracts, is starting to catch up to some of the players, and they're starting to realize, I might not play in 65 games total. Tyrese Haliburton right now, and that's significant because that's one less player in the mix potentially. If he doesn't get to 65 games, one less player in the mix for a backcourt all NBA slot.
I didn't even think about it from that angle. I just thought about it from him losing for it. Yeah. So,
but like that clears the way for Ant to maybe get one of those spots if Tyrese Haliburton is ineligible to get it. So, that sort of stuff, it all is tied together and matters.
Ant has only missed 3 games himself.
Yeah.
So, obviously he could, knock on wood, but he could have some sort of 10 plus 12 game injury at some point that would eliminate him from that. But you're right. If Tyrese Haliburton isn't going to be able to make an all NBA spot, that opens one up. And if it came to the end of the season and Ant was like the 7th guard, he's now the 6th guard. And like we said, that's a $41 million difference on his contract. And for next season, this is probably the most important part. It bumps his salary up by about $7 million for next year.
Yep.
Which you go from right now, if the Wolves let Mike Conley leave, they let Kyle Anderson leave, they waive the non-guaranteed contracts of Shake Milton and Troy Brown Jr. Team has about $13 million in space between the second apron to round out the rest of their roster. Well, if Ant bumps up by $7 million, I mean, it's impossible. There's absolutely, you couldn't even fill out the rest of the roster with minimums and stay beneath the second apron there. So I think that the takeaway from all of this is we have some more finite numbers that are still projections, but the most recent numbers to have there, and knowing that as great as it would be for Anthony Edwards to make all NBA, it increases the likelihood of being in the second apron drastically. And that in turn increases the likelihood of making some other cost-cutting move, which obviously a lot of people attach to Carl for a potential trade, but it's not just Carl. It's all the guys that would, hurt to leave, the quote unquote cost-cutting moves. You could, pretty obviously trade Naz Reid into someone's cap space and get picks back for that. If you needed to shave money, Jaden McDaniels, those sort of things. Like those are the uncomfortable conversations you're going to have if you're the Timberwolves, if you decide that the second apron is a line to be drawn in the sand, which we don't know. There's certainly a world where they just go, we're close. We're going to pay that second apron additional tax for next season. It's extremely unlikely that they would stay above that line in perpetuity. It's just such a high number, man, that I'm not going to be super begrudging Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry if they do, because we're talking about 50, 80, I mean, depending on who you bring back, just a massive luxury tax payment. So that all came into a little bit more focus this week. And it's a good point with Tyrese Haliburton potentially opening up a spot for Ant, which pinches his team a little bit more.
Yeah, but there's to your point, and we've been kind of saying this, is like there's so much that has to play out the rest of this season about where they're actually at as a franchise that will factor into what they do in the off season.
Yeah.
And so like none of that is set. Nothing is set in stone, as it relates to what's going to happen over the summer.
You know what? So when I tweeted out something about this yesterday, and it breaks out into a handful of different conversations about what justifies going into the second apron for next season. And there's a lot of, well, if they lose in the first round, for sure not. The second round, maybe. If they go to the conference finals, absolutely. I don't think about it that way. Like, okay. I just think there's that's a limited process, right? Like, I think that needs to be kind of approached with a little bit more nuance. Like, let's just say exactly what happened last year in the playoffs happens again in this year's playoffs, in the sense that Naz Reid is out, Jaden McDaniels is out, and Kyle Anderson ends up being out midway through the series. Like, if you get that bad luck hand again and you lose in the first round, does that mean you weren't a team that was going to go to the Western Conference Finals if you were at full strength?
Yeah.
I understand the optics would be terrible of losing in the first round and all of that, but my hope would be that through Tim Conley, through Chris Finch, through the ownership group, that they can, one way or the other, have a sober conversation about where are we actually at? Where can we put together reasonable projections, estimations, blah, 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 about this team to determine how we want to move forward. And even that is too. What if they get to the Western Conference Finals, but it's a little bit fluky? Maybe they play a team, they play the Nuggets and Jokic randomly gets hurt in the series and they end up beating them and going to the Western Conference Finals.
Look at the Lakers,
Sure.
for that, when Lakers make the Western Conference Finals, they say, oh yeah, we're close, let's run it back. And
now they're 24-25.
Whoops. Yeah. Yeah. So
exactly. So that's all I'm saying is, like, I don't think it needs to be, or I think there's just a danger in general in everything of making exclusively results-based decisions, and that's why I think it's so important to be honestly assessing this team day to day if you're Tim Conley and putting together, again, a sober analysis of what this team is and what this team isn't, for the better or for the worse, for the justification of more tax or for the justification of not paying it, and maybe then paying it in a couple more years when Ant's 25 or something like that. I'm just not going to, I don't know. I guess we'll see. I'll see how I feel whenever the Wolves' season does end. But I don't know. I think it's a little bit oversimplified in my opinion right now.
Sure. I get that. And we've often heard Connolly kind of say that, like, and I think Finch also says this when it relates to the progress of young players. It's like everything is not linear. Like, it's not everything is in the NBA is not a gradual, just you're ramping up to becoming a title winner. Like it things go in fits and starts in the league, and it's more up and down. And you have to try to kind of block out the noise of what's real and what's not. And I think you won't just be like zooming in on what happens in late April and May. You'll be zooming in on, okay, we've had 2 years of this now. Yeah. Or, if you want to take Carl's injury out of it, we've had like a year and a half of it by the time they'll get there. And it's like, what do we really think of what's gone on here for the last 2 years, maybe, as opposed to what happens in the next 3 months here?
Well, they kind of brought that mentality last year, right?
Yeah.
Where it was like, all right, you all don't think the Gobert trade was a good idea. We're actually, going to run it back because we think we have a good process of thinking on this, and we think chaos and not having enough time, blah, 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 led to the results not matching a realistic expectation. So I just say, keep that same energy, right? Like, and apply that to a whole new set of parameters that are coming up now, a lot more financially implicated. So I'll dig in it just for listeners in a future episode. I think I'll start doing some trade deadline stuff, and I just need to dig a little bit more into all the cap stuff of where this team is before thinking about it from a trade deadline standpoint. So maybe I'll do a separate video on that. But that's just kind of where we are just from yesterday afternoon to today on the cap things. Chris, I know we both have to get over to shoot around here, so I want to thank you for coming on at one, just writing the Nickeil story. I think that was great, and I would really recommend everybody going to check that out over at the Star Tribune. I have that up on the screen right now. The title is "How Reading Transformed the Career of Timberwolves Guard Nickeil Alexander-Walker." Chris, appreciate you doing it, man.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
All right. The last thing I have is we have 2 tickets to give away to Friday's game against the Orlando Magic. So for Patreon subscribers, send us a message on there letting us know that you are available for a Friday night, this Friday night's game, and we will select one person at random for 2 lower level tickets. So patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA if you want to become a Patreon subscriber, and if you already are, just send us a message on there that lets us know you are available for that game. Tonight it's Wolves Mavs. Britt and I will talk on Thursday morning about what happens in this Wolves game against the JV Mavs squad. And then later in the week, Kyle and I will start doing some trade deadline stuff, I think is our plan. We'll see if Ant makes the all-star team on Thursday. So that's what's coming up. Until then, he's Chris. You follow him on Twitter at Christopher Hine. You read him at the Star Tribune at startribune.com. Yeah, until Thursday morning, he's Chris. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.